Today, inshallah, we're carrying on with the things which nullify, ruin our salah. So, number 28 is to sing the Quran by lengthening vowels to adhere to a musical tune if it changes the meaning of the word. So, as from what this we understand is, if it doesn't change the meaning of the word, then it doesn't nullify the salah. Still, you shouldn't be singing the Quran anyways, but it doesn't nullify the salah unless it changes the meaning of the word. For example, he recites by stretching Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So obviously lengthening the vowels so that he adds a W after the D in Alhamdu, do as in a wow, he adds a wow. So Alhamdu is just a dal, right? But if you say Alhamdu, you've added a wow. Same goes for adding a ya after the lam. So it's supposed to be lillahi, but you say lillahi, so you've added a ya. And the H and an A after the ra, so Rabbi. Similarly, if the relayer, the muballigh, says Rabbana lakal hamd by adding an a after the ra or the ha, so if the muballigh does this, his salah is invalid. If the musical tone does not change the meaning, there is no invalidity unless he excessively extends the just what we call the meds, the normal stretches. So if it's normal, for example, Maliki, when you say Maliki Yawmiddin, if he says Maliki, this is a bit too much, but it probably won't invalid the salah. But if he stretches it even further, so he goes up to like 6, 7, 8 alifs. So basically he's doing it like adhan, then this would invalidate the salah. And soft letters, so the letters of prolongation, which are the meds, the alif, waw, and the ya, and soft letters, as they invalidate the prayer, even if it does not change the meaning. The meds, what is that? Literae productionis, and the soft letters are the 3 weak letters, the alif, the waw, the ya. When they are vowelless and preceded by a consonant that has the corresponding vowel, so the normal med. So the alif, what does the alif stretch? It stretches the fatha, okay, the zabar in Desi language. The alif stretches the zabar, the fatha, so you say maliki. If it was mu, the alif couldn't stretch it. Same goes with the waw. If it's preceded by a dhamma, a pesh, then it stretches that one. And the same with the ya. If it's followed by a kasra, a zer, then that would stretch that one. So that's what it's talking about. It's just talking about the meds. And preceded by a consonant that has a corresponding vowel. If the preceding consonant does not have the corresponding vowel, then they are weak and soft letters only and not prolongation. Okay? If the musical tone does not change the word from how it was neologized, and it does not lead to wrongful elongation of letters such that one letter becomes 2, instead it is beautification of the voice alone and graces the recitation, this is not blameworthy, rather it is recommended within and outside the prayer. So what we're talking about is the normal, nice recitation of the Quran that we hear daily. Right, that nice recitation, what that does, it doesn't mix up the words together, it doesn't stretch what's not supposed to be stretched, and it stays within the rules of tajweed. As long as you're doing this, then you may beautify your voice as much as you want. The following mistakes in Quran recitation invalidate the prayer. So basically, normally, the rule here would be anything that changes the meaning. But it's going to tell us what that means. For those who don't know Arabic, how can you tell that you changed the meaning of a word? It's going to say basically any of these mistakes will probably change the meaning of a word. So adding a word that changes the meaning, even if the added word is in the Quran. So for example, if it changes the meaning, and what that means is instead of saying, for example, Maliki, you said something completely different. But for example, if you were to say, now I don't know whether this example will hold up, but just as an example, if we were, instead of to say Maliki Yawmiddin, the one who owns the day of judgment, you said Sahibu Yawmiddin, which obviously is a mistake, it's changing of the Quran, but the meaning of Malik and Sahib in this context would practically apparently to us be the same. And I say that because there's a lot of deep spiritual meaning in the Quran, so changing a single letter of the Quran obviously is a problem. But just apparently, if we're looking just at the Zahir of the Quran, saying Malik and Sahib, meaning doesn't the meaning of that doesn't get ruined. Omitting a word that changes the meaning. Okay, so again, if you were, for example, omitting a word that changes the meaning, I'm trying to think of in which instance could you omit a word where it doesn't change the meaning. It would probably be with what we call the damirs, where, for example, huwa. It could probably be with those who know Arabic. Sometimes you're allowed to, you don't have to say the fa'il of a certain fi'l. And in some instances, probably the maf'ul also, if the maf'ul is obvious. So sometimes omitting a word, yeah. So omitting a letter that changes the meaning. Again, so either a word or a letter. If you omit a word or you omit a letter, and because of that you've changed the meaning of the Quran, your salah would be invalid. Or moving a letter ahead of its correct place. So you've accidentally, sometimes, you know, when you're talking fast, you might mix up the words, jumble the words in your mouth. So if you accidentally, instead of saying, for example, it's hard to think of examples for this on the spot, but if you were to mix up, for example, alhamdu, you were supposed to say alhamdu, but you said al-mahdu or something like that, right? Obviously that would change the meaning because you've mixed up the letters, you've jumbled them up. Or substituting a letter for another one, that one would be like the qalb and of course kalb. That would be a huge mistake. One would mean heart, the other one would mean dog. And this changes the meaning, and the resulting word is not in the Quran, and the reciter does not have any speech defect. So this one is more forgiving, this ruling here, this D, yeah? Moving a letter ahead of its correct place, substituting a letter for another one, and this changes the meaning, okay? But this would only, even if it changed the meaning, it would only invalidate your salah if the resulting word is not in the Quran and the reciter does not have a speech defect. Okay, so what happens is, you know, someone who's got a lisp, they're unable to say the sa, right? So because of that lisp, they're always doing what? They're substituting the sin for a tha, for example, or a fa. And because of this, because they have a speech defect, this would be allowed for them, but they would not be able to be an imam until they got it under control, so as to the point where you would be able to differentiate between the sin and the tha. Once you can start differentiating between the sins and the thas, right, that's when we can say, okay, he can start being the imam, because now we can tell when he's saying you know, salaba or thalaba. According to later scholars, mispronouncing one letter for another does not invalidate the prayer if the two letters are difficult to differentiate. For example, I believe that's a dha and a da. Yes. So So we're talking about ta, dha, the dha with the dot, and we're talking about sad, dad, the dad with the dot. So because these are similar, the dha and the da, some people mix these up. Turkish imams mix this up quite a bit, unfortunately. The sad and the sin, the ta and the ta, the tha and the s, the sin, but not the other way around. Yeah. So you can mispronounce the tha for a sa. So instead of saying thalatha, you say salasa. But you can't do it backwards, so you can't mispronounce the s as a tha because it's got nothing to do with tha. And za and dal. So al-lazina. Instead of saying al-ladhina, dal, dal, the dal. Instead of saying al-ladhina, you say al-lazina. Right? And this is very important. So, according to later scholars, mispronunciating these does not invalidate the prayer. However, the earlier scholars opine that it invalidates the prayer, and this is more precautionary. Okay? So if a person is really like struggling, and unfortunately we have this in many communities, but I personally know the Turkish community, especially after a certain age, it becomes extremely difficult to try and teach somebody how to pronounce the letters properly. It becomes really difficult, and they struggle quite a bit because for like 30-40 years they've been reading it a certain way, right? So the Fatiha, they say Siratal Lazina, or they say just Sirata with a normal ta, Siratal Lazina. So the later scholars have said that it's allowed, but normally what we would say is definitely not allowed. You have to fix your qiraat. But inshallah, as long as there's a difference in the rulings, there's a rahmah. Further details is in my commentary on Nur al-Idah entitled Mi'rajul Najah, and my paper on the subject Ighathatul Rili Zallatul Qari. So inshallah we've understood this. Omitting a word, omitting a letter, or adding a word, if it changes the meaning, your salah is invalid. Mispronouncing letters for each other, so mispronouncing it, so you didn't, so mispronouncing it, that is depends on the severity and if you have a speech defect and things like that. So the one who has performed dry ablution, okay, so what invalidates your salah? The one who has performed dry ablution finds, before he has sat in the final sitting position for the minimum amount of time in which the tashahhud may be recited, a sufficient quantity of water, and he is able to use this water. So, like we said, a person who's done dry ablution, which is tayammum, if they find water and they're able to use that water, the wudu becomes invalidated because the excuse has disappeared. And because of this, if he's in salah and he sees water, then his salah becomes invalid because his wudu is invalid. There was a funny story with this ruling. It was about how you should never listen to a speech midway through. So one day the imam of a masjid, he is teaching fiqh like we are, and he comes to this ruling, and he talks about a person who in the desert has lost his donkey, and the donkey had all the water on it. So what he does is he does tayammum and he starts praying, and when he says that, somebody walks into the hall and he starts listening, and he says during salah he sees his donkey. So what happens? His salah is invalid. So that person came in, and the first ruling he hears is if you see a donkey during your salah is invalid. When in fact the donkey is carrying the water, and that's why his salah is invalid, because his wudu becomes invalid at that point. So whenever I read this ruling, I remember that one story. Expiry of the maximum time period permitted for wiping on the footgear. So remember when we said you have leather socks, and these leather socks have a permissibility period. So if you're not traveling, it was 24 hours, so 1 day and night. But if you are traveling, it's 72 hours, we said. So during salah, if that time expires, your salah is invalid. Or if you remove the footgear with movement that is excessive or slight, it doesn't matter, because removing it necessitates you washing your feet. So if the footgear, if you removed it during salah, it doesn't matter, even if it was with a very small movement, your salah would be invalid, not because of the movement, but because of the fact that you removed it, and now you have to wash your feet again. A person unable to recite sufficiently learns or recalls from memory one verse of the Quran without an action from himself. So obviously this is not many people in this situation. So a person who knows not even a single ayah of the Quran, which normally would be he's just become Muslim, okay? So this person is just become Muslim, Maghrib's about to be finished, no one had the time to teach him how to say wal fajr or alif lam mim. And so he starts praying. Obviously, what does he do? He just stands quietly in qiyam, because qiyam is fard even if you don't know how to read. So he stands in qiyam and he doesn't recite anything. But during this salah, if he hears somebody say, let's say two people are having a conversation next to him and they say, what's the shortest ayah in the Quran? And he goes, wal asr or wal fajr or alif lam mim. And the person praying hears that, and because that's a very short ayah, the second you hear wal fajr, you can say wal fajr, it's memorized, his salah would be invalid, because now he started not knowing salah, not knowing Quran, so he wasn't reciting because he had an excuse. So he was missing that fard because he had an excuse, but now that excuse has disappeared with him memorizing a verse of the Quran. So now he has to start his salah over again and do the obligation of reciting Quran. 33. A naked person finds a garment. Same thing. So if you have an excuse to miss a condition or a fard or an obligation, and that excuse for whatever reason during your salah disappears. So you had tayammum, you found water, or you didn't know how to read Quran, you learned how to read Quran, you were naked, you found clothes. Okay, during salah, if any of these excuses disappear, so now you've got no reason to be praying naked, then you must restart your salah. A naked person finds a garment to cover himself, and the garment is one in which it is mandatory to perform the prayer. That is, it is entirely pure, and he owns it, right? Not somebody else's clothes, or another person owns it and permits its usage. Okay? The one praying with head gestures becomes able to bow and prostrate. So if you're praying while doing head gestures, but suddenly the ibuprofen kicked in and now you can stand, you can do ruku' and sajda, then you need to restart your salah from the beginning. A person remembers that he or his imam has an unperformed misprayer whilst being someone obliged to maintain the correct order of praise. Remember we talked about what we called sahibut tertib, a person who throughout their lifetime has never missed more than 5 salahs consecutively. This person has to keep the order of salahs, otherwise his salah is invalid, right? So if he remembers while praying Asr that he hasn't prayed the Dhuhr, his Asr becomes nullified because he needs to pray Dhuhr first. What happens if you miss more than 5 consecutive salahs is, because after 5 we say, it's over a day of qada, we say now it's too difficult to ask a person to pray all of his qada before his salah. Now imagine a person who has a month, a week, or maybe a year of qada. How are you going to tell them that, okay, before you pray Fajr today, you must finish all of your qada first? And the person has a whole year of qada. So that's why the ulama have put a limit, or whoever's put the limit has put a limit, and they've said after 5 salahs, we say that it's too difficult to pray them all before your salah. So Sahib al-Tartib is up to 5. At 6, you're no longer Sahib al-Tartib. And the ulama say that Sahib al-Tartib never comes back even if you finish all of your qada. Some say it, I believe some say it does. But either way, we have immense respect for people who are Sahib al-Tartib. And there is sufficient time to perform the current prayer, and he does so before expiry of the prescribed time for the 5th prayer. So what it's saying is basically, as long as there's nothing stopping him from praying the qada, then he has to pray the qada. So his salah is invalid, he has to pray the qada, and then he has to pray his own salah. Either that or it was his imam, in which case it's his salah anyways. The imam ceases his prayer and appoints a successor who is not eligible to be an imam. Okay, and this is why we tell people to not have their kids right behind the imam, because when the imam, if his wudu breaks or whatever, he needs to pull the person behind him forward, and if that's a child, everyone's salah is gone. The imam leaves the mosque without appointing a successor. So what happens is, now this may sound funny, but like we said, some rulings we just don't tell people because the likelihood of it going wrong is so high. So what we say usually, if the imam's salah is invalid, we would recommend the whole jama'ah just to start again. Okay, that's what we recommend. We just recommend everyone just start again. Let the imam go get his wudu, come back, and just start again. But if you want to, you can, what the imam can do if his wudu breaks, for example, and I say wudu breaks because there's no really other reason why the imam should be leaving salah. So let's say his wudu broke. So normally he would have to appoint someone from behind him. Now either he appoints someone or someone appoints themselves. So what he says is kharajtu min as-salah, which means I have left salah. And either he makes a little hand gesture or he just starts walking away. Now, if he doesn't appoint anybody and nobody steps forward and he leaves the mosque, then everyone's salah is invalid and they have to start again. 38. The sun rises during the Fajr prayer. Like we said before, because after Fajr there's no more prayer time all the way until the Dhuhr. Normally with Dhuhr, if you started praying Dhuhr and then Asr time came in, your Dhuhr would still be valid because you're still inside of a praying time. But Fajr, after Fajr there is no praying time. Therefore, if you're praying Fajr and the sun rises, so the time of Fajr ends, because there's no prayer time there, your salah becomes invalid. Or the sun moves from its zenith at midday during the 2 Eid prayers. And the onset and the Eid prayers, they end after the sun. So basically you have until the sun's zenith to pray Eid prayers, because after that Dhuhr starts anyways. And the onset of sunrise, the midday zenith or sunset, whilst one is performing a make-up prayer. Remember we said there are 3 times of the day where you're not allowed to pray qada. Like you're not even allowed to pray qada, we said. Yeah? That was when the sun rose, so the sun has started, so Fajr time has ended until the sun rises, which we said was about 30 minutes. And when it was in the midday, so before Dhuhr about 30 minutes and before Maghrib about 30 minutes. So these are the 3 times when you're not allowed to pray anything. So if you're praying qada or anything less than qada, then you have to make that up. The prescribed time for Asr enters during the Friday prayer. So for us as Hanafis, if Asr enters during Friday prayer is not valid. In other madhahibs, you can pray Friday prayer all the way in Asr time. I know in some other madhahib it's like that, but not in the Hanafi madhab. A cast falls off the body upon healing of the wound or the cause of someone being legally excused disappears. Like we said, if you're praying with a cast, so you haven't washed what's underneath, you've wiped the cast, and what's healed, and then it's healed and the cast comes off, then you see that your arm is healed, then you need to go and wash your arm. So for this reason, obviously, you had an excuse, the excuse has disappeared. Same thing goes for the legally excused person. As long as your excuse carries on, you can pray. But if your excuse disappears, then you have to start praying properly. Now, natural causes that invalidate the ritual prayer. So, if a female of sexually desirable age, and when it says sexually desire, let's see. This ruling applies even if she is from his unmarriageable kin or his wife. Okay? So that could be your mother, grandmother, it doesn't matter, your wife. Now, sexually desirable age meaning that she's not too old. Draws parallel with a man and the following conditions are met. Okay, so if you're not allowed to, remember, as a man you're not allowed to pray next to a woman. Okay, it is a complete prayer, so it's not like a janazah. They are both praying the same prayer together, so they're in the same jama'ah. They are both in the same place and there is no barrier between them, so there's no curtain. Okay, she remains parallel for the amount of time required to perform an obligatory integral, which we said is about 3 subhanallahs. He does not gesture to her to move behind him. Okay, so he's like, if he's telling her to go back and she's not listening to him, then according to this, let's see what it says. If she does not move back after his gesture, her prayer alone is invalidated. So as long as the guy tells her to go away, then it's her fault. However, if he does not gesture to her, his prayer alone is validated, unless he is the imam, whereby the invalidity of his prayer also renders her prayer invalid. That's kind of unnecessary to say, but yeah. The imam intended to lead her in prayer, obviously, because if the imam didn't intend to lead her in prayer, she wouldn't be in the prayer anyways. And they are both facing the same direction. Okay? So if all of these come together, then that person's salah is invalid. That man's salah is invalid. For the one overcome by minor ritual impurity during the prayer, the following invalidate the prayer and one cannot build upon what has already been prayed. Remember we talked about building upon what was already been prayed. We said you go, you get your wudu, you come back and you carry on from where you left off. That was called building upon what you already prayed. So if these things happen, which we're about to read now, you're not even allowed to build upon it. Okay? So what are those? To expose one's nakedness. For example, a woman exposes her forearms to perform ablution. B, to recite the Quran whilst going to or returning from re-performing ablution. Okay? So what happened was, your wudu broke during salah. Remember we said we don't usually tell this ruling to people because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Now we're listing those things which are able to go wrong. So your wudu broke in salah. You went to go get wudu, okay? If you're a woman and you expose your forearms, what happens? Your nakedness, now you're naked, right? So your salah is invalid. Okay? To recite the Quran, now you're probably wondering, then a woman can never rebuild her prayers. Well, yeah, unless she wants to pray with wet sleeves, like if she washes her arms through her sleeves, she's able to rebuild her prayers. But since no one's going to do that, then yes, you're right. No one is, a woman can't really rebuild her prayers without exposing her arms. To recite the Quran whilst going to or returning from re-performing ablution, right? So you lost your wudu, you were in salah, you're going to go get wudu, and on the way you decided to read some Quran. Your salah is invalid even though you're reading Quran. Number C, after being overcome by minor ritual impurity, to remain in the prayer whilst awake for the minimum time required to perform one obligatory integral without a strict need. Okay? So what it's saying is, you broke your wudu, but you didn't immediately go to get wudu, you just stood there. for a bit, contemplating what just happened to you. Okay, if you stay there for like 3 subhanallahs, then your salah is invalid. Or to walk beyond water which is nearby and onto that which is further away. Remember, you go to the wudu place, the first sink is there, but instead you go to the second sink. Right? You walked further than you had to. Your salah is invalid. So inshallah now you understand why we tell people just to start their salah from the beginning. So to walk beyond the water which is nearby onto that which is further away, unless it is less than the distance of 2 rows of worshippers. 2 rows of worshippers, remember, is approximately 3 meters. It is out of forgetfulness or crowdedness, or the nearby water is a well, and drawing water out of the well prevents building upon the prayer. So you're not allowed to pull water out of a well because that's too many movements, right? So basically just start your prayer again. 3. Wrongfully thinking one has entered a state of minor ritual impurity and thereafter exiting the mosque or walking beyond the rows of worshippers if performing the prayer in other than the mosque. Okay, so we're talking about, again, natural causes that invalidate the ritual prayer. We talked about how if a man and woman come parallel to each other, if a person breaks their wudu and they do any of these things, they're unable to restart their prayer from where they started. They're unable to rebuild their prayer. And if you wrongfully think you have entered, so if you think that you broke your wudu when in fact you haven't, okay, and thereafter you leave the mosque, or let's say you're not in a mosque, you walk beyond the rows of worshippers. So you're in your living room and you're having jama'ah in your living room, and let's say there's 2 rows of worshippers, you go past the rows if performing the prayer in other than a mosque. So if you do this, your salah is invalid. Okay? This invalidates the prayer and building upon it is no longer permitted. 4. Quitting the prayer thinking one of the following has occurred, even if it hasn't, invalidates the prayer, even if one has not exited the mosque. What are those things? We're about to read them. 1 is not in a state of ritual purity. Okay, so you think that you don't have wudu, or you think that you don't have ghusl. The maximum time period permitted, so you think, even if it didn't happen, you think that your khuf, your 24 hours or your 72 hours of your leather socks has expired. Or you think that one must make up a missed prayer. Let's say you're sahib al-tartib and you thought you missed the dhuhr. And there is an unexcused amount of filth on one's body or garments, or you think that your clothes are dirty. So the second you think this, basically, right? What does it say? If you quit the prayer because you thought of this, right? Because you thought that you didn't have wudu, or you thought that you missed the prayer, or you thought that your clothes were dirty. Okay, if you quit the prayer, then your salah is invalid. Okay, you can't just restart. 5. Someone praying in a congregational prayer is overcome by ritual impurity and then completes the remaining prayer in a place where following the congregational prayer is impermissible. Okay, so you're praying behind an imam, your wudu broke, you got wudu, you came back, but instead of praying inside the mosque, you decided to pray for some reason outside the mosque or somewhere where you're just not allowed to pray. Okay, then your salah is invalid. Okay. Let's read. We're never going to do all of this in one lesson anyways, so let's start on what is disliked in the prayer. So that which is makruh in the prayer, deliberately omitting a mandatory or sunnah action. Okay, so when we're talking about disliked, we're talking usually about tahrimi or tahriman. Yeah. omitting a wajib obviously would be deliberately omitting a wajib is makruh tahriman, and you have to redo your prayer. So you complete your prayer and then you redo it. Or you deliberately miss a sunnah, that would be tanzihan makruh. So yeah, mandatory action is prohibitively disliked, while omitting a sunnah is somewhat disliked. And remember, we already said that sunnah mu'akkada, sunnah ghayr mu'akkada, there's a difference. So depending on which sunnah you missed, it's going to be makruh, or it's either just going to be a mistake. So we don't really say makruh, we say you've done a mistake, you've done a bad thing. To fidget with one's garments or body without an objective countenanced by sacred law. So if you're fidgeting with your garments for no reason, just because you're nervous or whatever, this isn't allowed, this is makruh. Okay, obviously if you do it excessively, your salah is invalid. We already said that. To move pebbles away from the place of prostration, unless done once, only to allow one to prostrate perfectly. So what happens is sometimes if there are pebbles or there's rocks, one moment, if there are pebbles or there's rocks in front of you where you're about to do sajda, sometimes your forehead may not touch the ground properly, right? Imagine there's a pebble right here. So when I go down, I want this part of my forehead to touch, but this part is touching a pebble or something, right? So in that instance, with one swift and slight movement, you can get rid of the pebble or pebbles just to do sajda properly. Other than that, you shouldn't be moving about in salah. So even if there's something there, you just do sajda on it, it's fine. As long as it's nothing dirty or anything. If it's just pebbles and rocks and whatnot, you just do sajda on it. You don't worry too much about comfort. However, if done so, one can merely prostrate, then it is obligatory to do so, even if it is more than once. Obviously, now if it's going to stop you from doing sajda, if it's enough to stop you from doing sajda, then obviously you have to get rid of it. It becomes fard to get rid of it, because otherwise you can't do your sajda. To crack one's knuckles or interlace the fingers. So you either crack your knuckles in salah or you put your fingers together like this. To place one's hands on one's hips, okay, like this. To pray like this, because this position, this thing is to do with kibr, to think you're like the boss. It's like a proud way of standing. Like no one stands in front of their boss like this, right? This is how you stand in front of your children. You don't stand in front of your boss like this, and you're supposed to be in front of Allah. To turn the neck away from the direction of prayer. It means the head. So, like we said, if you move the chest, your salah is invalid. But if you only move the head, that's makruh. To sit during the tashahhud or between the two prostrations with the knees raised up like a dog. Okay. How do I explain this? So, your backside is on the floor. Your feet are on the floor, but your knees are raised up. This is the dog sitting. We don't like anyone who sits like this, even in salah and not in salah. For a man to lay his forearms on the ground during prostration. Okay, women are supposed to, they tuck themselves in and they put their arms on the ground. Men were supposed to keep our arms raised. The elbows should be in the air. To roll up one's sleeves or lower end of a garment. Rolling up one's sleeves, because this is seen as prideful. That's not how you go in front of your boss, like we said. To roll up your sleeves or the lower end of a garment. To pray in a lower garment alone when able to wear an upper garment. So basically to have your top, obviously as a man, to have your top off, to pray topless, because the aura of a man starts at his belly button. So technically, like we said, technically you can pray without a top, but that would be makruh. To reply to a greeting with a hand or head gesture. To sit cross-legged without a valid reason. Okay, so the reason it's saying all of this, right? Usually, whenever the fiqh book starts going on to things like makruhs, the list, you can make that list hundreds of pages. There are like so many things you could do in salah that would make something makruh. But usually the things they write are things which people might not know, or things that people might think is fine, or they might think that it's worse than it actually is. So usually that's the things that they add into like these subjects of makruh. So sitting cross-legged, most of you might have thought before today that would invalidate your salah. But now that you know, it's only makruh. When I say only makruh, you get what I mean. Makruh is still serious. This is somewhat disliked during prayer only, as it entails omitting the sunnah. Okay? To braid and entwine his hair and place them on the vertex of his head and tie them with a rubber. Similarly, to wrap braids around his head as women sometimes do, or gather all his hair at the nape and tie them with a string or a cloth so that they do not come into contact with the ground when he prostrates. All of the aforementioned are disliked. So, this is for men, yeah? To braid and entwine his hair and place them on the vertex of his head and tie them with a rubber. So the vertex being, I believe, the top of the head. So he braids his hair like this and ties it. Similarly, to wrap the braids around his head, as a woman sometimes do, or gather all his hair at the nape and tie them with a string. So that's like a ponytail or a cloth. All of this for men would be makruh. For men, if you have long hair, you leave it long. Let it be a bit messy. It's fine. You don't have to start doing ponytails and things. To tie a handkerchief or coil a turban around the head, leaving the center of the head exposed. I believe there's a hadith about this also. So you either wear a cap. If you want to wear a turban, you need to wear a cap and then tie the turban. What you can't do is have your turban and the middle of your head there's nothing there. Okay? To drape a garment, that is to allow it to hang down and not wear it as it is customarily worn. For example, placing a taylasan, a shawl-like garment known as khatta in our times, on the head whilst not wrapping it around the neck, or to make a tear at the top of the upper arm area of the garment and use the tear as sleeves whilst the original sleeves are thrown to the back. This is also termed draping, as it is dropping down without wearing the sleeves. Similarly, it is disliked to place a shawl on the shoulders and let it hang down from either both or one shoulder with the other end on one's back. This includes the binish and the faraji. So what it's saying is, right, there's two things here that we've got to be careful of, and if we get these, then we don't have to go into these examples. One, you should never be wearing something that makes you look prideful. So if you're wearing a jacket, for example, your arms should be in the sleeves. You can't just throw the jacket on your shoulders, if you get what I mean. That's like how the mafia puts their jackets. Okay. Also, you shouldn't be wearing things how they're not supposed to be worn. So if your shirt has sleeves, you shouldn't rip the sleeves and then put the sleeves on your arms or do weird things like that. Just wear the clothes as they're supposed to be worn. What it's saying with the shawl is if you have it just from the back to the front instead of wrapped around. You can't just have it thrown on your shoulder, basically, is what it's saying. So what does it say? To place a shawl on the shoulders and let it hang down from either both of one shoulder with the other end on one's back. So it's like a cape. To gather one's garment before going into prostration, makruh. Okay, it doesn't invalidate the salah. So a lot of people think this does invalidate the salah. I've heard a lot of people say it does. So tahrim and makruh, you really shouldn't do it. Even if you're doing it to stop your clothes from getting dirty, it's tahrim and makruh. So that's why, like, I've probably heard a lot of people say it ruins the salah. So what it's saying here is it's tahrim and makruh, but it doesn't invalidate your salah. It's makruh. Being wrapped in a garment from head to toe, or to tuck the garment under the right armpit and fling the two corners over the right shoulder, or vice versa. as worn by some of the North Africans. So we don't do this. To recite the Quran whilst in other than the standing position. So you can't recite Quran in ruku and sajda. But if you do, your salah is valid, it's just makruh, okay? For example, completing recitation in the bowing position. So you're reading Quran, but because you're rushing your salah, you're reading your Dhamma surah while going to ruku and you finish it in ruku. Similarly, uttering the invocations prescribed for moving from one position to the next after the movement is complete, which is Subhana Rabbiyal Azim or Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, as it entails omitting the utterance in its prescribed position and performing it elsewhere. So Subhana Rabbiyal Azim is said where? In ruku. So if you're saying it after getting up from ruku, then you're doing it in the wrong place. So that's a makruh. To make recitation of the Quran in the first unit, we'll stop here inshallah. So 19. Inshallah, we'll stop here. What we learned today is what we finished off what invalidates the salah. Then we read natural things which happen that invalidate your salah. Okay. And then we started on the makruh things in salah, which is and we got to 19 inshallah. So there's a question: is it makruh for women to gather their skirts or dresses before going into prostration in order to prevent themselves from tripping on it when standing back up? Yes, it would be makruh. The makruh in the sense that you shouldn't be praying in clothes which don't allow you to pray properly. So that would be the makruh. But since you've done it, since you're wearing clothes, now of course you're going to have to stop yourself from falling over in salah. So the makruh would be to pray in those clothes that stop you from praying properly. Now I'm not sure as to the details of praying in dresses and things, but there must be a way to do it properly. If there is no other choice, then we always take the ruling that Islam never asks you to do the impossible. So if it is impossible, what I just said, then just carry on with what you're doing, inshallah. Okay, inshallah, we'll end here. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الفاتحة مع الصلوات.